Hello and welcome to today's story. My name is Philip, and I like to dive deep into scary Asian stories and cover them in my videos. If you have an interesting story you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. I always read all comments. For now, let's get into today's story, where we have a few terrifying stories to share tonight. One of them takes us deep into the quiet back streets of Kyoto, Japan. A place where the air always seems a little too still, and the sound of distant temple bells fades just a second too soon. It's the kind of street that feels frozen in time, wooden houses leaning over narrow stone paths, the faint scent of incense still lingering from a forgotten prayer. That's where a foreign traveler, camera in hand, stopped by a small roadside stall run by an old woman. Her eyes were pale, almost milky, and her hands trembled as she held up a charm made of white silk. "For protection," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "But never open it." He smiled politely, thinking it was harmless. A souvenir. But that night, as rain began to fall and the cicadas went silent, something shifted in the darkness of his hotel room. A soft, scratching sound coming from underneath his bed. He had arrived in Kyoto on a gray afternoon in early spring, when the city was quiet and the air still held the cold bite of winter. His name was Daniel, 28, from London, and he'd come to Japan chasing something vague, something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was solitude. Maybe it was the feeling of walking through history that stretched further than memory. Kyoto, with its temples, alleys, and stories whispered through wooden walls, seemed like the perfect place to disappear for a while. He was staying in a small guest house, tucked behind a line of narrow streets near the Gion district. The building leaned slightly to one side, as though time itself had pressed against it for too long. Inside, paper walls creaked with every step, and the faint smell of tatami mats mixed with something else, old incense maybe, or the faint sourness of rain-damp wood. The owner, a quiet man with a permanent smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, handed Daniel a room key and said, "You're the only guest tonight." He laughed awkwardly, but the man didn't laugh back. That evening, after unpacking his bag and charging his camera, Daniel went out for a walk. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the soft glow of paper lanterns. The city felt like a maze of memories, narrow alleys, flickering lights, whispers of old prayers carried in the wind. That's when he saw her. An old woman standing at the edge of a shrine that looked forgotten by time. The gates were half-rotted, the rope that once held shied paper charms now frayed and blackened by age. A few stray cats wandered near the entrance, but none dared to step inside. The woman's small stall was barely more than a wooden table, covered in charms, red, blue, gold, and one white. Only one. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't superstitious, but there was something magnetic about that little white charm. It was perfectly clean, untouched by dust or weather. The woman noticed his stare and smiled, her teeth slightly dark, her lips cracked. "Omamori," she said softly. "Protection." He knelt down, curious. What kind of protection? Her cloudy eyes met his. "The kind that keeps you safe, if you obey it." She held out the white charm. "Never open it." He laughed, trying to hide his discomfort. "All right, I promise." She nodded once, as if sealing the deal, and slipped the charm into his hand. Her fingers were cold, almost damp. "Keep it close," she whispered. "It will stay near you now." By the time he looked up to thank her, she was gone. The table still stood there, but empty. The air felt heavier, and even the sound of rain dripping from the eaves seemed distant, muffled, like the world had suddenly grown quieter. Back at the guest house, He placed the charm on the small bedside table next to his phone. It looked harmless, even delicate. A white silk pouch tied with red thread, faintly scented like old paper. He took a picture of it, planning to post it later, with a caption like, "Local protection charm from Kyoto." But when he checked the photo, his stomach turned. The image was slightly blurred, as if the charm had moved just as the shutter clicked. He dismissed it as motion blur, maybe his hand had shaken. He went to brush his teeth, turned off the light, and lay down on the futon. The sound of wind outside faded. The silence inside the room thickened. He could hear the faint hum of his phone charger, the occasional creak of the walls. And just as sleep began to settle in, he heard its soft, deliberate scratching from under the bed. He froze. The sound stopped, then started again, slower this time. A dragging noise like fingernails over wood. He told himself it was a mouse, or the pipes, or maybe even his imagination. But when he turned his head toward the bedside table, his heart stopped. The charm had fallen to the floor, and somehow it was facing him. Daniel didn't move at first. He just stared at the small white charm lying on the wooden floor beside the futon, the red string twisted loosely like something had tugged at it. His brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe he'd knocked it off somehow. Maybe a vibration from the passing train outside. But there were no trains nearby. The guest house was deep in the old district, far from any metro lines. He sat up slowly, his heart still beating hard in his chest. The scratching had stopped the moment he turned his head. Now, the silence was absolute. He could hear his own breathing, shallow and quick. Finally, he reached over, picked up the charm, and placed it back on the table. The silk felt strangely warm to the touch. Trying to shake it off, he plugged in his earphones, played a podcast, and forced himself back to sleep. But somewhere in the early hours of the morning, the scratching returned. This time, softer, like it was waiting for him to notice. When he woke up, sunlight filtered weakly through the paper shoji windows. His phone had died during the night, the charger unplugged. He didn't remember doing that. The charm sat exactly where he'd left it, or so he thought. When he looked closer, he noticed the red thread had been tied differently. Not tighter, not looser, just different. The knot was now on the opposite side. He frowned, shook his head, and told himself he was imagining things. Jet lag. That had to be it. He got dressed, grabbed his camera, and headed out to spend the day exploring temples. The morning air was crisp, the streets slowly filling with the sound of bikes and chatter. By noon, Kyoto looked normal again. Alive, busy, beautiful. The events of last night faded to the back of his mind. He wandered through Nishiki Market, visited Yasuka Shrine, took dozens of photos of red torii gates and moss-covered lanterns. Yet somehow, the charm never left his thoughts. He could feel it in his pocket the entire time, heavier than it should have been, like it was made of stone. A few times he reached in just to touch it, to reassure himself it was still there. Each time, it felt warmer. That evening, he stopped at a small family restaurant near the river. The owner, a woman in her 60s, noticed the charm when he paid his bill. Her eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" she asked quietly, in accented English. Daniel blinked, surprised by her tone. "Just a street vendor near a shrine. Why?" The woman's expression tightened. "White omamori. Not for sale. Not for outsiders." She shook her head and handed him his change with both hands, as if trying not to touch him. "You should not keep it," he laughed nervously. "It's just a charm, for protection." She didn't smile. "Then you should pray it protects you." Her words lingered in his head the whole walk back. The streets were quieter now, the lanterns dim, the air colder. When he reached the guest house, the owner was standing by the entrance, lighting incense. Daniel bowed slightly, trying to be polite, but the man barely acknowledged him. As he stepped inside, Daniel noticed something odd. Every room door along the hallway had a small paper talisman above the frame, except his. Inside his room, everything seemed untouched. His clothes were where he'd left them, his bag unzipped. The charm, however, was not on the table. It was now resting on his pillow. He froze. He could feel the pulse in his neck, a wave of unease rolling through his body. He hadn't left it there. He was sure of that. He stood in the doorway for nearly a full minute, staring at the white pouch, trying to think logically. Maybe the cleaner moved it. But there was no cleaner. The guest house owner had said he was the only one staying tonight. He sat down cautiously on the edge of the futon. The charm looked harmless as ever, still white, still tied shut. But now, faintly, he thought he could smell something metallic, like iron. Blood? No. It was probably just the incense from the hallway, he told himself. That night, he decided to record the sound. He placed his phone under the bed, hit record, and tried to sleep. The scratching began again, slow at first, then faster. He forced himself not to move, not to breathe too loudly. After a few minutes, the noise stopped completely, replaced by something else, a faint, wet exhale, like a breath, right beneath him. He couldn't take it anymore. He shot up, grabbed his phone, and turned on the flashlight. Nothing. The floor was empty. No sign of rats, no holes, no movement. Just the faint smell of damp wood. He checked the recording, but the file was corrupted. Only white noise. The rest of the night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. At some point before dawn, exhaustion won. He woke up to birdsong, sunlight, and a new problem. The charm was gone. He searched everywhere under the futon, inside his bag, even behind the sliding doors. Gone. Then, as he went to plug in his phone, he saw it, sitting neatly on the windowsill, perfectly still, facing inward. He took a step closer, and that's when he saw the difference. The white silk wasn't clean anymore. A small, reddish stain had appeared near the base of the thread, faint but unmistakable. He reached for it, then stopped. For the first time, the air in the room felt wrong. Heavy, cold. Something about the silence felt expectant, like the room itself was holding its breath. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something inside the room was watching him. The charm still sat on the windowsill, facing inward as though it had been deliberately placed there. The red thread seemed brighter now, like it had been freshly dyed. He stared at it for a long time, debating whether to throw it away. But the old woman's voice echoed in his mind. Never open it. He didn't even know why he cared. It was just a charm, a piece of fabric and string. Yet every instinct in his body told him not to touch it. That morning, when he stepped outside, the guest house owner was sweeping the front steps. The man didn't look up until Daniel greeted him. His eyes flicked to Daniel's pocket, where the shape of the charm showed faintly through the fabric of his jacket. His face stiffened. "You still have it?" he asked quietly in Japanese. Daniel nodded. "The white charm?" "Yeah. Why?" The owner looked around the empty street before answering. "Those are not for sale. Not anymore." He hesitated, his knuckles tightening around the broom handle. "You should return it. To where you found it." "The shrine?" Daniel asked. The man's jaw twitched. "If you can find it again." He turned back to his sweeping, his tone final, like he didn't want to be part of the conversation anymore. But that was the problem. Daniel couldn't find the shrine again. He walked through the same alleys that afternoon, retracing every turn, every landmark. The street where the old woman's stall had stood was there, but the shrine was gone. No torii gate, no table, not even the cats that had lingered near it, just a blank wall covered in ivy. As he stared at the wall, an old man selling takoyaki nearby spoke up. "Looking for something?" Daniel pointed. "There used to be a shrine here, an old one." The man chuckled softly. "No shrine there for many years. Fire burned it down, long ago." Daniel frowned. "There was an old woman here yesterday, selling charms." The smile on the man's face disappeared. "You mean white charm?" Daniel nodded slowly. The vendor turned away without another word. That night, the unease returned. He decided to sleep with the lights on. The charm remained on the windowsill, and this time he kept his camera pointed directly at it, recording. For hours, nothing happened. Then, around 2 a.m., he woke up, shivering. The air in the room had grown unnaturally cold. His breath fogged in front of him. The camera light was still blinking, still recording. The charm hadn't moved, but something was wrong with it. The silk looked puffed, swollen, as if something was pushing from the inside. The red thread quivered slightly, like it was straining. He sat frozen, every muscle in his body tense. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the movement stopped. He played back the video immediately. For the first few hours it was normal, but near the end, the camera flickered. The charm shifted. A faint pulse like a heartbeat appeared beneath the silk, and just before the footage cut to black, a shadow passed across the wall, not outside, inside the room. The next morning, he confronted the owner. "I want to leave. Tonight." The man looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "One more night," he said quietly. "But keep lights on, and burn this." He handed Daniel a small bundle of incense. "Before you sleep." That evening, Daniel did as told. The smell filled the room sweet and bitter at once. The smoke curled toward the charm, as if drawn to it. He sat there for hours, watching the wisps of smoke twist and dance around it like invisible hands were shaping them. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear. He fell asleep. He dreamt of the old woman. She stood at the same shrine, smiling softly, her eyes empty. In her hands, she held another charm, white, but this time streaked with red. "You opened it," she whispered. "Didn't you?" Daniel jerked awake, drenched in sweat. The incense had burned out. The charm was now lying on his chest. He scrambled backward, knocking over the table. His phone fell, flashlight flickering across the floor. That's when he saw it, the faint outline of handprints pressed into the tatami mats, small ones, child-sized, leading from under the bed to where he, Saturday. He grabbed the charm and shoved it into his bag, deciding to throw it away first thing in the morning. But sleep never came again. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear it soft breathing, right next to his ear. When dawn finally came, he rushed out and made his way to the river, ready to toss it in. But when he opened his bag, the charm wasn't there. Instead, resting neatly on top of his camera was a lock of black hair, and tied around it, a piece of red thread. Behind him, the faint voice of an old woman drifted through the morning air. "Never open it." He turned, but the street was empty. Daniel's hands trembled as he stared down at the lock of hair tied neatly with red thread. The morning sun should have felt warm, reassuring, but it didn't. The air around him seemed heavy, muffled, as though the city itself was holding its breath. He stood frozen by the Kamo River, tourists and locals passing by without noticing the panic in his eyes. He opened his bag again, desperate to find the white charm. Nothing, just the hair. His heart pounded faster, his palms damp. For a brief, reckless second, he thought about going back to the guest house to find it. But some instinct, deeper than reason, screamed, "Don't go back." Still, he couldn't leave it unresolved. Something inside him needed to understand what was happening. He turned around and began walking. His footsteps echoed strangely against the narrow alleys, each sound slightly delayed, as if the world was out of sync. When he arrived at the guest house, the front door was open. The smell of incense hung thick in the air, far stronger than before. Inside, the owner stood near Daniel's room, sprinkling salt along the threshold. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes were red like he hadn't slept. "Did you open it?" Daniel froze. "Open what?" The owner's voice dropped. "The omamori." "No," Daniel said quickly. "Of course not." The man's stare lingered for a moment too long, as though he could see straight through the lie. He sighed, murmured something in Japanese Daniel didn't understand, then walked away without another word. Daniel entered the room. It was darker than he remembered. The blinds were half closed, even though he hadn't touched them. The smell of burned incense still lingered, sharp and sweet. But what made his stomach turn was the charm. It was back on the table, perfectly still, perfectly clean. He approached slowly, every step cautious. The red thread looked new again, bright and untarnished. For a long minute he just stared at it, unable to move. Then he reached out and realized the air around it was freezing cold. His breath fogged instantly. He pulled his hand back, startled. Then the thread twitched, not from the wind, not from vibration. It moved like something alive inside was pushing outward. A faint thump followed a sound so small he almost thought he imagined it. Then again, louder this time, a rhythmic pulsing thud, a heartbeat. He stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. The charm pulsed once more, then stopped. The silence after was deafening. He could hear his own pulse in his ears, feel the pressure in his chest. He grabbed his phone, fumbling to record a video. The screen flickered violently, the camera unable to focus. But what appeared for a split second on the feed made his blood run cold. A hand, thin, pale and wet-looking, pressing from inside the charm's silk fabric. Fingers pushing outward, stretching the surface before vanishing again. He dropped the phone. It hit the floor, and the screen cracked, still recording. The charm began to move on its own, shifting slightly across the table, dragging itself toward the edge with slow, jerking motions. "Stop," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Just stop." It didn't. It fell from the table, landing softly on the tatami mat. The red string began to unravel, fiber by fiber. He stepped back instinctively, his foot hitting the wall. The sound of fabric tearing filled the room small at first, then louder, like someone ripping open skin. And then it opened. Inside was not paper or prayer like a normal omamori. Instead, a small clump of hair, black and matted, a fragment of bone, and a single human fingernail, curled like it had been clawing at something before being cut off. The smell that followed was unbearable, iron, rot, and something old. The air turned icy. His breath came out in visible clouds. The lights flickered. In the reflection of the cracked phone screen, he saw movement behind him. Slowly, he turned. Standing in the corner of the room was a figure. Small, crouched, its long hair hanging over its face. Its limbs moved in a disjointed way, as if it hadn't used them in years. The figure's head tilted to one side, and from behind the curtain of hair, something wet dripped onto the floor. Daniel couldn't move. His body refused. His mind screamed to run, but his legs felt like stone. The figure began to crawl toward him, the sound of its joints popping echoing through the silent room. Each movement was slow, deliberate, almost curious. When it reached the futon, it stopped. Its head lifted slightly, revealing the faint outline of a mouth stitched shut with red thread. He staggered back, tripping over the chair. His phone still recorded, the audio filled with static and the faint sound of whispering. The figure raised one hand and pointed at the open charm. Then, without warning, it let out a guttural, breathless sound, half a moan, half a hiss. Daniel bolted. He ran out of the room, down the hallway, nearly slipping on the polished wood. The guest house owner shouted something behind him, but Daniel didn't stop. He burst through the front door and into the street, gasping, trembling. The sun was already sinking behind the rooftops, the shadows growing long. When he looked back, the windows of the guest house were all dark, except for one. His room. A faint white glow pulsed from within, in perfect rhythm, like a beating heart. By the next morning, Daniel was gone. The guest house owner told the police he'd left before dawn shoes missing. Bags still in the room, door wide open. The futon was unmade, the phone still recording. But what unsettled everyone most wasn't the mess. It was the smell, faint but undeniable, iron and incense, the same kind the owner had burned the night before. When they searched the room, they found the white charm again, restitched, neat, perfect. No sign of the torn silk, no trace of what had been inside. Just a new red thread, slightly darker than before, tied with care and precision. Still warm to the touch, the police collected it, bagged it, and brought it to the local shrine for inspection. The priest refused to take it. He simply stepped back, hands trembling, and whispered, "That's not ours." After that, the charm disappeared. 2 weeks later, another traveler checked into the same guest house, a university student from Canada. The owner hesitated before giving her the room key, but said nothing. She smiled, thanked him in broken Japanese, and carried her luggage upstairs. That night, she sent a message to her friend back home. "Kyoto is so peaceful. I think I'll stay a few more days. This room feels old, but cozy. Someone left a small white charm on the windowsill. It's beautiful. I'll keep it for luck." She never replied to the messages that followed. A few days later, the guest house closed without explanation. Locals say the owner moved away, leaving the building locked and untouched. Only the faint scent of incense still drifts through the cracks of the old wooden door. And sometimes, late at night, if you walk past that narrow street behind Jian, you might see it a small table standing beneath a paper lantern, an old woman sitting behind it, smiling softly. She'll hold up a charm pure white, tied with red thread, and whisper, "For protection," but never open it. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faint sound of breathing coming from inside. The story of the white charm wasn't the only strange encounter whispered across Asia, because it seems every country has its own quiet warning, something small, ordinary, that hides something terrible. Travelers talk about them in hushed tones, claiming they're harmless until you ignore the rules. Tonight's next story comes from the heart of Seoul, South Korea, a city where neon lights meet ancient superstition, and where a single act of kindness or curiosity can open a door you can't close again. It starts, as many do, with something simple: a rainy night, a forgotten street corner, and a rack of free umbrellas left out for good luck, but one of them carried something that refused to be left behind. Her name was Mia, 26, from Singapore, visiting Seoul for the first time. She had always wanted to see the city in spring, the cherry blossoms, the street food, the cafes tucked into narrow alleys that always seemed to glow with life. But that night, the weather changed too quickly. One moment, she was leaving a restaurant in Hongdae. The next, thunder cracked above the rooftops, and sheets of rain poured down hard enough to drown the city lights. People ran for cover beneath signs and awnings, laughing and shouting. But Mia had wandered too far from the main street. The alley she stood in was nearly empty, just the echo of rainfall, a flickering neon sign, and a rack of umbrellas near the corner store entrance. A small sign above them read in both Hangul and English, "Take one, return later, for good luck." She hesitated. The umbrellas looked too perfect, too neatly arranged for something left in the open. But the rain was relentless, and she had no choice. She reached for the nearest one, black, sleek, with a red tag hanging from the handle. It looked almost new. The tag had words written on it in Korean, but the ink was slightly smudged from the humidity. The store clerk behind the window noticed her pause and gave a small nod. "It's okay," he said through the glass, his voice muffled by the rain. "Free umbrella. Good luck." Mia smiled awkwardly, mouthed a thank you, and stepped into the storm. The umbrella opened with a soft, metallic click. A faint scent of perfume drifted out, light, floral, and oddly familiar, like someone had just been standing beneath it moments ago. As she walked, she noticed something strange. Inside the canopy, faint Korean letters had been written along the fabric. They weren't visible at first, only appearing when the light hit them at a certain angle. She didn't recognize the words, but when she took a photo with her phone and translated it, her stomach tightened. It said, "Do not walk alone." At first, she thought it was a prank, maybe part of a local art project. Seoul was full of creative displays, after all. But as she moved through the narrow streets, something about the night felt off. The air was thick, humid, heavier than it should have been after a storm. Her reflection followed her through the puddles on the ground, distorted by ripples of water and neon glow. Everything looked normal. Almost. The strange part came when she stopped to check her phone. For a moment, her reflection didn't stop with her. It kept walking for half a second longer before freezing. The delay was so slight she almost missed it. But she felt it, the unease, the faint chill in her chest. She shook it off and kept walking. The rain eased into a drizzle, and she ducked into a small convenience store to buy a drink. The owner, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked up as the doorbell chimed. His gaze immediately went to the umbrella. "You got that from outside?" he asked. "Yes," she said, glancing at the red tag. The sign said. He cut her off sharply. "You should leave it," Mia frowned. "Leave it? It's raining." His expression didn't change. "Just don't take it home." The tone of his voice was so firm it made her hesitate. But before she could ask why, another customer entered, and the man turned away. Mia left the umbrella, propped against the counter while she paid, but as soon as she stepped outside again, it was waiting by the door upright, handle facing her, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. She looked around. The street was empty. The rain had stopped. Yet somehow, droplets were still sliding down the black canopy, glistening under the streetlight. She sighed and picked it up, telling herself it was just coincidence, a forgotten umbrella, a bit of rain, nothing more. But as she headed toward her hotel, she didn't notice the reflection in the shop window behind her, the one that hadn't moved yet, still standing there, staring after her long after she was gone. Back in her hotel room that night, Mia shook the rain from her hair and hung the umbrella by the door. The city lights shimmered through the glass, streaked with the last drops of the storm. Seoul looked peaceful again, bright, alive, safe. She made tea, changed into a sweatshirt, and scrolled through her photos from the day. The umbrella incident already felt small, almost silly. But as she sipped her tea, a faint dripping sound pulled her attention away from her phone. Drip, drip, drip. She glanced toward the bathroom. The faucet was dry, then to the window closed. The sound was coming from behind her, the umbrella. It hung from the metal hook by the door, perfectly still. Yet small beads of water gathered at the tip and fell, one by one, onto the hardwood floor. She frowned, walking over to touch it. The fabric wasn't wet anymore, completely dry, but the dripping didn't stop. She held her hand beneath the tip, nothing. Still, the sound continued, as if the air itself was mimicking rain. She shook her head, muttered something about jet lag, and went back to bed. By the time she turned off the lamp, the sound had faded. The next morning, sunlight cut across the room. Mia woke late, stretched, and checked her phone. 2 missed calls from a local number. Probably spam. She ignored them. The umbrella was still by the door, though the puddle beneath it had vanished. That afternoon, she spent the day sightseeing Bukwon Hanok village, the palace grounds, coffee at a cat cafe. Everything felt normal again. But as she passed by store windows, she started to notice something. Her reflection wasn't quite right. It lagged just slightly, a fraction of a second behind her movements. When she stopped, it stopped too, but not always at the same time. Once, she even caught it glancing sideways while she was looking straight ahead. The difference was so small, she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. Almost. By the time she returned to the hotel, the sky was dark again. Rain began to fall softly outside. She reached for the umbrella without thinking. The moment it opened, that same perfume filled the air, faint, floral, and warm. She held it close and stepped outside to buy dinner from the convenience store across the street. The pavement reflected the neon signs like liquid glass. As she crossed, she caught her reflection again, this time in a car window. It was smiling, but she wasn't. Her breath caught. She stumbled, heart racing, and the umbrella slipped from her hand. It clattered onto the wet pavement, rolling slightly before coming to a stop. For a brief second, she thought she saw a pale hand, just the faintest outline reaching from inside the canopy to grab the handle. Then a car passed, spraying water, and the image was gone. Mia stood frozen until someone behind her shouted. She picked up the umbrella and ran back into the store, trembling. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed. The cashier, an elderly woman this time, glanced at her with quiet concern. "Are you all right?" the woman asked in Korean. Mia nodded weakly. "Just drop my umbrella." The woman's eyes fell on the red tag. Her expression changed immediately. She stepped back slightly, her voice lowering. "Where did you get that?" Mia hesitated. "Outside, from a rack." It said, the woman cut her off sharply. "Take one, return later?" Mia blinked. Yes. The woman's face went pale. That was taken away. That sign should not be there anymore. She looked toward the door as if afraid someone might hear. "You need to throw it away." Mia's pulse quickened. "What's wrong with it?" The woman didn't answer directly. She only said, "When you use that umbrella, you are not walking alone." Her words sent a chill down Mia's spine. "You mean it's cursed?" The woman pressed her lips together and didn't respond. She simply handed Mia her change and said softly, "Just don't take it inside again." Mia forced a shaky laugh. "Okay." But when she stepped out into the rain again, the umbrella was already open, standing upright by itself near the door. No one had touched it. Her throat went dry. She reached out, slowly, and grabbed the handle. The metal was cold, colder than the rain, colder than the air. Back in her room, she locked the door behind her and leaned the umbrella against the wall. For a long time, she stared at it. Every few seconds, she swore she heard a faint sound coming from inside the same rhythmic tapping, like raindrops falling on hollow wood. Eventually, she crawled into bed, unable to shake the unease. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Her eyelids grew heavy, then tap. She opened her eyes. The umbrella was gone. Heart pounding, she scanned the room until her gaze landed on the window. The umbrella now stood open in front of it, perfectly still, its shadow stretching long across the floor. Raindrops slid down the glass outside. But inside, from the edges of the canopy, water still dripped softly slow and steady onto the carpet. And faintly, from somewhere close behind her, she heard footsteps. Not loud, just one step, then another. Mia turned slowly toward the mirror. Her reflection stood facing the window, umbrella in hand, smiling. Mia barely slept that night. The sound of dripping filled her dreams, blending with the echo of footsteps that seemed to pace just beyond the edge of hearing. When she woke, her neck ached, and the air in the room felt damp, like someone had been breathing close to her skin while she slept. The umbrella still stood by the window open, perfectly dry, yet water pooled beneath it. She didn't remember leaving it like that. A small part of her wanted to throw it away right then, but something made her hesitate. What if the old woman at the store was right? What if throwing it away only made things worse? That morning, as she stepped into the hallway, one of the cleaning ladies startled at the sight of her. Her gaze flicked immediately to the umbrella in Mia's hand. She bowed quickly, muttered something in Korean, and hurried down the hall without looking back. Mia caught a single word she understood. Salda. To live. It wasn't a warning, it was a prayer. Later, she met her friend Yoon, a Seoul local she'd connected with through a travel app. Over coffee, Mia tried to laugh about the whole thing. "It's probably just me being paranoid," she said, forcing a smile. "Weird dreams, weird weather, weird umbrella." But Yoon didn't smile back. "Describe it," Mia hesitated. "Black, red tag. Smells like perfume." Yoon's expression shifted instantly. "A red tag?" "Yeah," Mia said slowly. "You've heard of it?" Yoon leaned forward. "You need to get rid of it." Mia frowned. "Why does everyone keep saying that?" "There was a story," Yoon said quietly, "from a few years ago. A girl took an umbrella from a subway stand in Gangnam. Same kind black with a red tag. The next day, she was found near the Han River, drowned. But it hadn't rained." Mia's chest tightened. "You think it's the same one?" Yoon shook her head. "I don't know. But people say it's cursed, that whoever takes it is followed by the last person who used it." Mia tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "That's dramatic." Yoon didn't laugh. "Promise me you'll return it. Tonight. Put it back where you found it." Mia nodded, though she didn't truly believe it would matter. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the skyline, she made her way back to the convenience store where it all started. The air felt heavy, electric, like the moment before thunder. But when she reached the corner, the rack of umbrellas was gone. The storefront was dark, closed. She stood under the streetlight, gripping the umbrella tightly. Then, a flicker of movement. Across the street, her reflection stared at her from a shop window. She wasn't moving, but it was. The reflection tilted its head, slow and deliberate, as if curious. Her stomach turned. She stepped backward. The reflection didn't follow. It stayed there, smiling faintly. "Stop it," she whispered under her breath. though there was no one to hear. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder. The scent of perfume filled the air again, stronger this time. She opened the umbrella out of instinct. The letters inside glowed faintly in the dim light. "Do not walk alone." Her hands trembled. She felt watched. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind her. "Miss!" She spun around. It was the elderly store owner, standing just beyond the glow of the streetlight, holding a paper talisman in one hand. "Put it down," he said firmly. "Now." Mia's heart raced. "What's happening?" He took a step closer, rain soaking through his clothes. "It doesn't want to be alone," he said. "If you carry it, it carries you." "I'll just leave it here," she stammered, lowering the umbrella. "Not here," the man said quickly. "If you leave it without a prayer, it follows." Thunder rolled across the sky, and for a moment the street went dark. When the light returned, the man was gone. Mia stood alone, the umbrella still open in her hand. The rain fell harder, and she noticed something terrible. The ground beneath her was dry. The drops weren't touching her, not one. And somewhere nearby, footsteps began to echo again, soft, wet, uneven. She turned slowly, scanning the street, but saw no one. The sound was getting closer, circling her like someone pacing just out of sight. "Mia!" The voice was faint, familiar. She froze. It sounded like her own voice. Her reflection, still smiling in the glass across the street, raised its umbrella in unison and whispered something she couldn't hear. Then, as lightning flashed, she saw a pale hand gripping the inside of the canopy, fingers pressing outward, straining against the fabric. The umbrella pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and from somewhere behind her, the perfume smell thickened, not sweet anymore, but rotten, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Mia's heartbeat pounded in her ears, each thud almost matching the rain that wasn't touching her. The street around her looked warped. Neon signs shimmered through the downpour like they were melting, colors bleeding into the puddles that shouldn't have existed. The umbrella above her head felt heavier now, its handle slick in her grip, and through the patter of rain she could hear it, that faint, uneven breathing again, coming not from behind her, but inside the umbrella. She froze. Her hand trembled on the handle. Every instinct screamed to drop it, to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She could feel a pulse through the metal shaft, faint but rhythmic. The umbrella was breathing. Lightning flashed, and for the briefest second, her reflection across the street looked different. Her head tilted back, eyes rolled white, mouth open in a silent scream. The image flickered, then returned to normal, but the smile lingered a second too long. Mia stumbled backward, her shoes splashing through puddles that didn't ripple. The voice came again, soft, almost mournful, whispering her name. "Mia." She spun around. The street was empty. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw movement. In the reflection of a nearby bus shelter window, a figure stood beside her, a woman holding an identical umbrella, black with a red tag, her face hidden in shadow. But when Mia turned to look, there was no one there. The figure was only in the glass. Her breath hitched. She turned slowly back toward the reflection. The woman's head lifted. Her hair was soaked, plastered across her face. Beneath it, something pale and colorless stared back. Not eyes, just hollow, glistening pits that seemed to swallow the light. The reflection reached out, pressing one hand against the inside of the glass. And at the same moment, Mia felt fingers close around her wrist, cold, slick, and real. She screamed, yanking her arm back. The umbrella fell from her hand, hitting the pavement with a soft thud. The rain touched her for the first time, instantly soaking her hair and clothes. She looked down. The umbrella lay open on the ground, face up, like an open mouth gasping for air. The red tag was gone. In its place was something else tied around the handle, a thin black ribbon soaked dark with water. She didn't remember kneeling, but suddenly she was on the ground, staring at the inside of the canopy. The words that had once said, "Do not walk alone," were smeared and distorted. Something new had been written over them, faint but legible. "You are not alone now." Her vision blurred. The rain grew heavier. "Mia!" She turned. Standing beneath the streetlight was Yoon. Her friend's clothes were drenched, but her expression was calm. Too calm. "Yoon!" Mia gasped, stumbling to her feet. "You have to help me." But Yoon didn't move. She just smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have opened it." "What?" "You broke it," Yoon said softly, taking a slow step forward. "It only wanted someone to walk with." Mia backed away, her foot hitting the curb. The rain didn't seem to touch Yoon. She was dry, perfectly dry, her hair unmoving despite the wind. "Stay away from me," Mia whispered. Yoon tilted her head, the same way the reflection had earlier. "You took what wasn't yours." Her voice had changed. Lower now, hollow, like she was speaking from inside a tunnel. Mia stumbled back, nearly tripping. The umbrella on the ground began to shake, its canopy quivering as though something inside was trying to crawl out. The sound of fabric stretching filled the air. "Please," Mia whispered, not sure who she was speaking to anymore. The umbrella convulsed violently, then went still. She crouched, staring. The surface of the black fabric bulged outward, forming the faint shape of a face pressing from underneath. 2 indentations' eyes, and the outline of a mouth opening in a silent scream. Then, from the inside, a pale hand pushed through the fabric, tearing it open like wet paper. Mia screamed, stumbling backward as a drenched figure crawled out. Its hair hung over its face, long and tangled, dripping with rainwater. The same scent of perfume filled the air, floral, sweet, rotting. The figure's hands left dark stains wherever they touched. Its nails were split, cracked, as though it had clawed through something solid to get out. It lifted its head slowly, strands of hair peeling away from its face to reveal skin that looked too soft, too waterlogged. Mia's breath caught. It was her own face staring back at her, ruined, swollen, smiling faintly. She stumbled back toward the streetlight, shaking her head. No, that's not me. That's not..." The figure tilted its head. The same motion, the same timing. It mirrored her perfectly, every movement, just a heartbeat behind. Then, in unison, both whispered, "You shouldn't walk alone." Mia dropped to her knees, shaking, unable to look away. The last thing she saw before the world went dark was her reflection, her second self, stepping forward to pick up the umbrella, closing it gently. And when it did, the sound of rain stopped completely. The next thing Mia remembered was waking up on cold pavement, the world spinning in shades of gray. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet metal and perfume, the same faint floral scent that had haunted her since the first night. Her head throbbed. She tried to sit up, but every muscle felt heavy. Around her, the street was empty. No cars, no people, not even the buzz of city lights. It was as if Seoul had gone silent. She reached for her phone dead. The screen cracked, the last photo still faintly visible. Beneath the spiderweb of glass, it was a blurry picture of her reflection, but the face wasn't hers. The mouth was wrong, too wide. She swallowed hard and pushed herself to her feet. The umbrella was gone. She turned in slow circles, scanning the street for it, but there was nothing. Not even the sound of dripping water, just the faint rustle of wind and her own uneven breathing. Then she noticed the red tag. It lay on the ground near the gutter, half soaked, the string torn at the edges. She picked it up carefully. The ink had bled, but she could still make out faint Korean letters. This time the words were different. Return what you took. Her stomach twisted. A movement caught her eye across the street. A glass bus stop shimmered faintly under a flickering light. Behind the fogged glass, she could just make out a figure sitting on the bench. Someone holding an umbrella. Mia's pulse quickened. She stepped closer, her shoes splashing through shallow puddles that didn't ripple. As she neared, she realized the figure wasn't moving at all. It sat perfectly still, the black umbrella open above its head, droplets frozen mid-drip along the edges. "Hello?" she called, her voice breaking the silence. The figure didn't answer. She hesitated, then walked closer until she stood just outside the shelter. The umbrella tilted slightly, revealing the person beneath it, a woman, dressed in soaked clothes, her hair falling over her face. The same perfume filled the air again, stronger now. Mia froze. It was her, or something that looked like her. The same hair, the same jacket, even the same small scratch on her wrist. The figure's head lifted slowly, and for the first time, Mia saw its eyes. They weren't empty anymore. They were full alive, but they looked wrong. Too still, like glass marbles pressed into skin. The reflection smiled, not wide, just a calm, resigned smile. Then it spoke, and when it did, the voice came not from the figure, but from somewhere inside Mia's head. "It doesn't want to be alone." She stumbled backward. "What are you talking about?" The voice was calm, echoing faintly in her ears. "It finds the lonely ones, the travelers, the ones who walk without anyone beside them. It protects them for a while." "Protects," Mia repeated, her voice shaking. A small laugh, hers, but not hers, rippled through the air. "That's what the sign says, isn't it? For good luck. But the umbrella doesn't bring luck. It borrows life." Mia shook her head. No, that's impossible." "It kept you dry," the voice continued. "It followed you home. It walked beside you when you were alone. And when you stopped needing it, it needed you." The glass of the bus shelter began to fog from the inside, faint outlines of handprints spreading across the surface. The figure beneath the umbrella leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on her. "Return what you took," it whispered. Mia's breathing quickened. "I didn't take anything." The voice came again, louder now. "You took her place." The glass trembled. The reflection's face began to blur, its features melting together like wet paint. She stumbled back again, heart racing. The words she had read inside the umbrella, "Do not walk alone," echoed in her mind, twisting now into something new. You will not walk alone. Her body felt heavier with every step, her vision dimming at the edges. The figure stood up slowly, stepping out of the shelter, its wet feet leaving no marks on the ground. It carried the umbrella effortlessly, gliding more than walking. Mia turned to run, but her reflection in the nearest store window didn't follow. It stayed behind, holding the umbrella, watching her with calm, patient eyes. When she looked down, her hands were wet. Not from rain. From inside her palms, faint trails of water dripped steadily, pooling at her feet. Her shadow on the ground rippled, unnaturally, as though someone else was standing beside her. Then, far down the street, she saw at the same umbrella rack near the old convenience store, the same handwritten sign, fluttering faintly in the wind. "Take one. Return later. For good luck." A realization hit her all at once. The rack never disappeared. It moved. Mia's throat tightened. She began to walk toward it, each step heavier than the last. By the time she reached the corner, the rack was full again, dozens of umbrellas, all black, all with red tags hanging from their handles. The first one gleamed faintly under the light, droplets of water sliding down even though the sky was clear. She bent down to place the red tag back on it. Her hands trembled. The moment her fingers brushed the handle, a chill ran through her body. Her reflection in the store window across the street tilted its head again and smiled faintly. "You're not alone now," the voice whispered. "You never will be." And then, as if responding to her touch, every umbrella on the rack opened at once. The next morning, the storm was gone. The city had dried, the sky a calm, indifferent blue. Locals on their way to work barely noticed the small police car parked near the corner store in Hongdae, where an officer stood staring at a strange sight, a row of umbrellas swaying gently in the wind. Though the air was perfectly still, he called for his partner, muttering that something felt off. There were too many umbrellas, far more than the rack could hold, and they were dripping constant, rhythmic drops of water falling to the pavement, even under the clear morning Sunday. Inside the store, the clerk told the officers that a young woman had been there the previous night, foreign, frightened. She'd been talking to herself, clutching an umbrella. But when the rain stopped, she'd vanished. No one had seen her leave. Hours later, as workers swept the street, one of them found a single red tag caught in a drain. "Great." The words were half washed away, but just visible enough to read. "Return what you took." That night, a new sign appeared above the umbrella rack. The handwriting looked different this time, older, shakier. It said, "Take one, return later, for good luck." And below it, scribbled faintly in English, someone had added a single line, "Do not walk alone." At closing time, a college student passing by paused in front of the store. Rain had started again, sudden and heavy. She looked up at the umbrellas, smiled, and reached for the sleek black one with the red tag. The clerk tried to stop her, shouting from the counter, but the words were drowned out by thunder. The girl stepped outside, opened the umbrella, and froze. A faint scent of perfume drifted up. Inside the canopy, barely visible under the glow of a streetlight, the words shimmered through the fabric in fading ink. "You are not alone now." And as she walked away, water began to drip steadily from the umbrella's edge, though the rain had already stopped. The story of the black umbrella wasn't the end, just another warning whispered across Asia's restless nights. Because from Tokyo to Seoul, from alleyway shrines to mountain temples, one truth remains the same. Curiosity is never free. Each object a charm, an umbrella, a simple offering promises protection, but always asks for something in return. And our next story takes us deep into the mist-covered hills of Hong Kong, where silence clings to stone and the line between worship and invitation begins to blur. Locals say the temple there is abandoned, that no prayers have been spoken for decades. But when one traveler accepts a stranger's incense, he learns that some temples are never truly empty, and some prayers are not meant to be answered. 2 stories done and 2 to go. I hope you like the stories so far. When I make these long videos, there are nights where I stay up really late working on them. Tomorrow I will be uploading another video. If you don't want to miss it, just subscribe. It's free. Haha. His name was Oliver, a photographer from Manchester, who had come to Hong Kong chasing stories of old temples hidden among the city's forgotten hills. He wasn't religious, not even superstitious, but he had always been drawn to the kind of places most people avoided, the quiet ones, the ones that looked frozen between worlds. That morning, the city below was loud, and restless trams screeching, vendors shouting, skyscrapers gleaming under a heavy gray sky. But Oliver wanted none of it. He'd heard rumors of a temple above Taipo Road, deep in the mist, that locals called the Breathing Shrine. Nobody could say why. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed it was still tended by monks who never came down the mountain. The cab driver who dropped him off at the foot of the trail didn't speak much English, but the man's expression said enough. "You go there?" he asked, pointing up the winding road disappearing into fog. Oliver nodded. The driver hesitated, then muttered something in Cantonese that sounded like a prayer before driving off. The climb was long and eerily quiet. The air grew colder with every step. Mist curled through the trees, thick enough to swallow the sound of his own footsteps. The forest felt heavy, as if the air itself carried memories. Every few meters he passed what looked like burnt-out lanterns, their glass cracked, their metal frames twisted with rust. After nearly an hour, the forest opened into a clearing, and there it was, the temple. Small, almost fragile-looking, built into the side of a hill. The red paint on its walls had faded to pink, its stone steps swallowed by moss. 2 statues of guardian lions stood at the entrance, their faces eroded by time. Between them hung a tattered banner, its edges darkened by smoke. Oliver raised his camera. Through the lens, the temple looked impossibly still. No birds, no insects, not even wind. Only the faint scent of incense drifted through the air, though no smoke was visible. He stepped inside. The air shifted instantly, heavy and warm. The dim interior smelled of old ash and rain-soaked wood. The walls were covered in faded murals, celestial beings, demons, and gods he didn't recognize. Some had been scratched away entirely, leaving behind only pale outlines of figures with no faces. At the center stood an altar. Dust coated every surface except one, a small brass urn filled with incense sticks. They looked freshly placed. That's when he saw the monk. The man stood behind the altar, motionless. His head was shaved, his robes the color of earth, his eyes half closed, as if in meditation. He hadn't made a sound, yet Oliver felt as though the monk had been watching him since the moment he arrived. "Sorry," Oliver said softly, lowering his camera. "I didn't mean to intrude." The monk said nothing. Instead, he picked up 3 unlit incense sticks from the urn and held them out. Oliver hesitated, then reached for them. The monk's hands were cold, not the kind of cold that comes from the air, but something deeper. "Thank you," Oliver murmured, unsure what else to say. The monk nodded once, slow and deliberate, then gestured toward the altar. Oliver didn't really know the proper ritual, but he'd seen it before. In other temples, light the incense, bow 3 times, place them in the sand. Simple enough. He struck a match, the flame flickering weakly in the thick air. As the incense caught, a trail of smoke spiraled upward, strangely pale, almost silver. He bowed once, twice, and as he bowed the 3rd time, he noticed something odd. The incense wasn't burning down. It was growing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sticks lengthened millimeter by millimeter, while the smoke thickened and curled in impossible patterns. He turned toward the monk in confusion. The man's lips curved slightly, forming the faintest smile. Now the air felt different, heavier, charged, like the temple itself had begun to breathe. The monk finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "Now," he said, "you've invited them." For a long moment, Oliver just stood there, unsure if he'd heard the monk correctly. "Invited who?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But the monk didn't respond. He only turned slightly, his pale eyes glinting in the incense light, then gestured for Oliver to place the sticks into the urn. Oliver hesitated. The incense had now grown an inch longer, the tips still glowing but refusing to burn away. The smoke had thickened too soft, almost fluid, curling through the air like something alive. He felt foolish for hesitating, but something deep in his chest told him he shouldn't continue. Yet curiosity or pride won. He planted the sticks in the sand. The instant he did, the smoke shifted direction. Instead of rising toward the ceiling, it spread outward, low and slow, spilling over the altar like fog. The scent was sweet, almost pleasant, but there was something else beneath it, something faintly metallic, like blood on old iron. Oliver turned to speak again, but the monk was gone. The space behind the altar was empty. He called out, his voice echoing against the cracked walls, but no answer came. When he stepped outside, the mist had thickened around the temple, swallowing the trees and the path he'd come from. For a brief second, he thought he saw movement, faint silhouettes shifting between the fog. But when he blinked, they were gone. It took him nearly 20 minutes to find his way back down the trail. The forest felt different now, too still. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, only the sound of his own breathing. When he finally reached the base of the hill, he felt relief until he noticed the faint gray smudge on his fingertips. Ash. He brushed at it, but the powder didn't come off. It had settled into the skin like soot. He told himself it was nothing, just residue from the incense. That night, back at his hotel, he couldn't shake the feeling that the scent had followed him. Even after showering, it lingered faintly on his hands, that same sweet rot. He uploaded the photos from the temple to his laptop. Most were fine, but a few near the end made his chest tighten. In several of them, he wasn't alone. Behind him, in the dark corners of the frame, faint shapes stood watching, blurred, almost human, some tall, some hunched, some with no clear outline at all. At first he thought it was fog distortion, but in one photo the shapes were clearer, 3 figures. Standing perfectly still behind the monk, their faces were blank, completely smooth. Oliver tried to laugh it off, though his throat was dry. "Probably just smoke," he muttered. He zoomed in further, but the more he looked, the more the image seemed to shift. The outlines of the figures warped slightly, like they were turning toward him even within the frozen photo. The room's air felt heavier. He closed his laptop and decided to call it a night, but sleep didn't come easily. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw those shapes in the mist. And somewhere between dreams and waking, he heard the monk's voice again. "Now you've invited them." He woke with a start, drenched in sweat. His room was dark, but something was wrong. The air smelled faintly of smoke. He turned on the lamp. 3 faint gray handprints marked the foot of his bed. Ash. His stomach turned. He reached for his phone to take a picture. But before he could, the lamp flickered. The temperature dropped. The reflection in the TV screen across the room shifted not his own face, but something else leaning over his shoulder. He spun around. Nothing there. The lights steadied again. The handprints were gone. He barely slept after that. By morning, his eyes were bloodshot and his hands were trembling. He told himself it was exhaustion. He'd overworked himself, spent too much time chasing ghost stories. That's all this was. Still, when he left the hotel for breakfast, the hotel clerk glanced up from the counter and froze mid-sentence. "You visited the temple?" she asked quietly, in accented English. Oliver blinked. "How did you—" She pointed to his forehead. He touched it and felt something rough beneath his skin. In the mirror behind her, he saw it clearly, a faint burn mark, circular, right between his eyebrows, the exact spot where devotees place a blessing of ash. Only this one was darker, fresh. He tried to laugh it off, but the clerk didn't smile. She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes and said, "You shouldn't have taken their incense." He frowned. "Their incense?" She nodded. "The temple on the hill. It's been abandoned for 50 years. No monks there. Only ashes." Oliver stared at her, waiting for her to continue, but she looked away, refusing to meet his gaze. And for the first time since arriving in Hong Kong, the air around him didn't feel humid or heavy. It felt cold, like something unseen had just walked through him. For the rest of the morning, Oliver couldn't stop touching the faint burn mark on his forehead. It wasn't painful, but it pulsed faintly like a heartbeat beneath the skin. Every time he caught his reflection in a shop window, the mark seemed darker, more defined. He told himself he'd go back to the temple that afternoon to see what was really going on. But when he asked for directions, every local reacted the same way. Confusion first, then quiet discomfort. One old man selling roasted chestnuts shook his head immediately. "No temple," he said firmly. "That place is closed." "Abandoned?" Oliver pressed. The man's eyes darted around, scanning the street like he didn't want anyone to hear. "Not abandoned. Left alone. You should do the same." That was the second warning that day. The third came when he tried to hire a driver. The woman looked at the photo he'd taken of the shrine and visibly paled. She handed the picture back without a word and walked away. By the time he reached the outskirts of the city, the clouds had rolled in again. Gray mist slid down the mountains like smoke. He took the same winding trail, camera slung around his neck, though the path looked different now, darker somehow, narrower. The burnt-out lanterns he'd passed before were gone. In their place were bundles of dried reeds, tied with red string. Each one smelled faintly of incense. As he walked, he started to hear something. At first, it sounded like wind, then whispers, dozens of them. Soft, rhythmic, weaving in and out of each other like chanting a language he didn't understand, but somehow recognized. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't kind either. It just noticed him. When he reached the clearing, he stopped cold. The temple was there, but it didn't look abandoned anymore. Fresh banners hung from the eaves. The walls gleamed with recent paint. Dozens of lit incense sticks burned at the altar, their smoke forming a hazy veil in the doorway. And through that veil, he saw movement. The monk, standing in the same position as before, hands clasped, smiling faintly. Oliver stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "Who are you?" The monk tilted his head slightly. "You returned. Good." "I needed to ask you something," Oliver said, trying to keep his tone steady. "Yesterday, after I left—" The monk raised one hand. "They followed you." Oliver's chest tightened. "Who?" "The ones you invited." The monk gestured to the altar. "You brought their offering. They brought you their mark." Oliver's fingers brushed the burn on his forehead. "This?" The monk nodded. "It means they've seen you." For a long moment, Oliver couldn't speak. He felt caught between confusion and disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered, backing away. "There's no such thing as—" He stopped. Something moved behind the monk. Through the smoke, faint silhouettes took shape. Dozens of them. The same faceless figures from his photographs, bowing, kneeling, all facing him. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the temple's threshold. "What do they want?" The monk's faint smile didn't waver. "You lit the incense," he said softly. "That was the invitation. They are waiting for your prayer." "I didn't come to pray," Oliver snapped. "I came to take photos." The monk's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "They don't know that." The smoke thickened, swirling around Oliver's legs like water. The air smelled stronger now, sweet and sickly, with that same hint of iron. He turned to leave, but the doorway behind him had disappeared. Only mist. "Stop this," he said, his voice cracking. "Tell them to leave me alone." The monk stepped closer. His feet didn't make a sound on the stone floor. "You asked for something when you lit them," he murmured. "Everyone does." Oliver shook his head violently. "I didn't ask for anything." The monk looked at him with calm pity. "Then they will take what's owed." Before Oliver could respond, the sound began again. The chanting, louder this time, all around him. He spun in every direction, searching for where it came from. The air shimmered. The figures began to move, rising from their bowed positions, still faceless, but now turning toward him. He bolted for the exit, or where it should have been, but the mist thickened into a wall. The monk's voice echoed through it, faint and distant. "You can't leave a prayer unfinished." Oliver's vision blurred. The air pressed against his chest. He stumbled out into the open, coughing, only to realize the temple behind him was gone again. Just the forest, silent, still. He looked down at his camera, desperate for proof. The screen flickered on the last image he'd taken showed the altar, but there were no figures, no monk, only him, standing alone, holding the burning incense. The mist didn't fade. It followed him down the mountain like breath on the back of his neck. Every few steps Oliver turned around, expecting to see the temple again, but all that met him was shifting fog and the faint scent of incense. When he finally reached the roadside, the world felt slightly wrong, like reality had lost its balance. Colors looked muted, the air unnaturally still. His camera hung heavy around his neck. The last image he'd seen on the screen kept replaying in his mind himself, standing where the monk had been, incense in hand, surrounded by nothing. He flagged down a taxi, barely able to speak. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror several times during the ride, but said nothing. Oliver stared out the window, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He told himself he was tired, that none of it was real, that he'd inhaled too much smoke, maybe hallucinated. But then he saw it. In the reflection of the window, his forehead wasn't just marked anymore, it was glowing. A faint red ember pulsed beneath the skin like a coal being fanned to life. He pressed his palm against it, but the heat burned through his hand. "Are you okay?" the driver asked. Oliver didn't answer. He just said, "Stop the car." He stumbled out into the street, barely aware of where he was, some busy district lined with night markets and neon signs. People moved around him, laughing, eating, scrolling on their phones. Normal life. Except when they passed him, they bowed, not deeply. Just a subtle dip of the head, each one accompanied by that same faint, sweet smell of incense. He froze. A man walked by, then turned to look at him, eyes glassy, unfocused, and bowed again. A woman followed, hands clasped together like in prayer. Oliver backed away, his voice cracking. "Stop! Please, stop!" No one answered. He ran, pushing through the crowd until he reached a narrow side street. The air was different there, colder, damp. His reflection stared back at him from the glass window of a closed herbal shop. Only it wasn't quite his reflection anymore. The face, staring back, was covered in a thin film of ash, eyes faintly glowing beneath the layer of gray. The mark on his forehead now burned with soft orange light, and faint trails of smoke curled upward from it. He stumbled back, gasping. The reflection didn't move. Then it smiled. He turned and bolted down the street, not daring to look again. Every step echoed like footsteps following him, just a fraction behind. When he finally reached his hotel, he slammed the door behind him and collapsed against it, chest heaving. The room was exactly as he'd left it, neat, quiet, except for one thing. The air smelled like the temple. He turned toward the bed and froze. 3 incense sticks stood upright on the nightstand, burning slowly, their smoke curling upward, pale and steady. Oliver's legs gave out. "No," he whispered. "I didn't light those. I didn't." The phone on the desk buzzed. A message. It was from an unknown number. Just 2 words. "Finish praying." He dropped the phone. His ears were ringing now, the same low hum that had filled the temple. He tried to open the window for air, but when he touched the glass, a handprint appeared from the other side. Gray, powdery, human, the lights flickered. His reflection in the window moved closer. "Leave me alone," he shouted. The reflection's lips parted. "You asked for this," it whispered. "You asked to see them." "I didn't. You took their incense," it said, voice layered, echoing like several people speaking at once. "You made the offering. Now they bow to you." The words hit him like a weight. He looked around at the floor, the walls, and saw more handprints forming. Dozens, hundreds, some small, some impossibly large, all reaching toward him. His phone buzzed again. A photo this time. It was him sitting cross-legged on the hotel floor, eyes closed, incense burning in his hands, but he hadn't moved. He looked down. The incense was already between his fingers, glowing faintly, the ends curling in on themselves. He dropped them instantly, but they didn't fall. They hung in the air like they were caught on invisible strings. The room filled with smoke. Through it he could see faint silhouettes standing in rows, bowing low, their heads touching the floor. The same faceless shapes from the temple, the same ones from his photos, and from the center of them, a familiar figure stepped forward, the monk. Only now, the monk's face was gone. In its place was his own. Oliver couldn't breathe. The monk him smiled faintly, pressed his palms together, and whispered, "Now you tend the shrine." The incense in Oliver's hands burst into flame. The last thing he saw before the room turned black was the faint glow of hundreds of gray hands pressing against the glass, all bowing in perfect unison. When Oliver came to, everything was quiet again. The hotel room was dim, lit only by the pale glow of the city outside. For a long moment, he thought it had all been a dream, the chanting, the figures, the fire. But the air was thick with smoke, and his hands were coated in a fine layer of gray ash. His throat burned. His clothes were damp with sweat. He forced himself upright, his mind foggy, every thought heavy as lead. The incense that had been burning earlier was gone. Only the faint smell lingered, sweet, metallic, and faintly rotten. He stumbled to the mirror above the sink. At first, his reflection looked normal, just his pale, exhausted face streaked with ash. But when he leaned closer, the mark on his forehead began to move. It pulsed once, twice, and then the skin split slightly, releasing a thin curl of smoke. He staggered back, horrified, gripping the edge of the counter. The mirror fogged over, and through the haze, faint words appeared written backward, as if traced from the other side. "You are seen." His stomach twisted, then his phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number, just one line. "They bow because they remember." He hesitated before opening the photo attached to it. It wasn't him this time. It was the monk, the same one from the temple, standing in front of the altar, smiling. Except now, the monk's head was bowed. His hands were clasped together in prayer. And in the corner of the frame, a new figure stood in his place, behind the incense. Oliver. The realization hit him like a wave. The mark, the chants, the bowing. It wasn't just a curse. It was a ritual. The temple hadn't been abandoned. It had been waiting. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, his heartbeat slow and unsteady. The more he tried to remember the details of that first visit, the more they blurred. Had he ever actually spoken to the monk? Had the man truly been there? Or had he already been seeing something else? An echo, a remnant. He checked the camera again. All the photos were gone except one. The image showed the temple exactly as he'd first found it: quiet, overgrown, covered in moss. No monk, no smoke, no movement. But something new had appeared this time. Dozens of faint gray shapes kneeling in the fog, each one holding incense, each one turned toward the lens, bowing to whoever took the photo. Him. Oliver's hands shook. His entire body felt like it was humming, vibrating with something unseen. He reached up to touch his forehead again, and this time, the ash came away like dust. Beneath it, the mark was no longer red. It was gold, faintly luminous. The light pulsed in rhythm with his breathing. He thought of the driver, the clerk, the strangers bowing on the street. They hadn't been cursed. They had recognized something. The words the monk had spoken echoed in his mind. Now you tend the shrine. He looked around the room. Every surface was dusted in ash now, thick enough to coat the furniture, his bag, his clothes, even his shoes. But the strangest part, faint lines had been drawn in it. Circular, concentric, like the outline of a temple floor plan. He backed away slowly, his heart pounding. The ash shifted as he moved, forming patterns he couldn't quite make out: sigils, maybe, or prayers. When he reached the door and grabbed the handle, his hand came away blackened. He stepped into the hallway. The hotel was silent. The lights flickered weakly, one after another, down the entire corridor. On the walls, someone, or something, had pressed gray handprints, hundreds of them, trailing toward the stairwell. He followed them down. In the lobby, the clerk was gone, the front desk empty. Only the faint smell of incense filled the air again. It was coming from outside. He stepped through the glass doors and froze. The street had changed. The busy road was gone. The skyscrapers were gone. Before him stood the temple once more, perfectly whole, its banners bright red, its doors open wide. Inside, he could see the brass urn gleaming in the light of hundreds of burning sticks, and beside it, the monk. He lifted his head slowly and smiled. "You kept the flame," he said. "Good." Oliver took a step back. "What are you?" The monk tilted his head, the same faint motion he'd made before. "Not what? Who?" Oliver shook his head, trembling. "You're not real." The monk's smile deepened. "I was, once, as were they, and now—" He gestured to the altar. Oliver's eyes followed his hand, and saw that the figures bowing in the smoke were not spirits anymore. They were solid, human, each one wearing modern clothes, some still clutching cameras, maps, backpacks, travelers, all of them marked on the forehead just like him. The monk's voice softened. The temple chooses its keeper, always one at a time. And with that, the monk's body began to fade, turning to ash that scattered into the air. Oliver stumbled forward, shouting for him to stop, but the figure dissolved completely. Only his voice remained, drifting through the incense. "Now they come for you." The temple walls seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling softly. The chanting began again, not distant this time, but rising from every direction. And when Oliver turned to run, the doorway was gone. Only the altar remained, burning brightly, waiting for him to kneel. The next morning, the fog around Taipo Road was thicker than usual. Locals said it rolled down from the hills earlier than it ever had before, carrying with it a faint, sweet smell of burning incense. A few hikers, claimed they heard bells echoing through the mist, even though the nearest temple had been abandoned for decades. Police were called after a cab driver reported finding a camera bag by the roadside open, soaked from the dew, but filled with fresh photos. Every image showed the same scene: a small mountainside shrine, lit by hundreds of glowing incense sticks, and a man kneeling before the altar, his head bowed, his hands pressed together in prayer. When the photos were sent for analysis, investigators noticed something strange. In the final image, the man wasn't kneeling anymore. He was standing behind the altar, where the monk had once been, looking directly at the camera. The ash mark on his forehead glowed faintly gold. His lips curved into a small, almost grateful smile. Locals say the mist hasn't lifted from that part of the mountain since. A few months later, a group of students hiking the same trail found a newly restored temple near the clearing freshly painted, the brass urn shining as if recently polished. They didn't see anyone inside, but one of them swore they heard quiet chanting just before they left. Near the entrance, a small wooden sign had been placed in both Chinese and English. It read, "Welcome, traveler. Please take 3 incense sticks and offer them with respect." As the students walked away, one of them looked back. A figure now stood behind the altar, robes the color of ash, face obscured by drifting smoke. He raised one hand slow, deliberate, and gestured toward the urn, as if inviting them closer. The wind carried the faint sound of crackling flame, and for the first time in 50 years, the temple began to breathe again. The story of the temple in Hong Kong left one thing painfully clear sometimes: the offering doesn't end when you leave. Because across Asia, from the incense smoke of forgotten shrines to the neon streets of Seoul, strange exchanges still happen every day. Objects, gifts, things that seem harmless until you accept them. Our next story takes us deep into Japan's most haunted mountain, Mount Inunaki, a place so isolated that even GPS signals vanish halfway up the trail. Locals say time moves differently there, that the forest never forgets what it swallows. And when a young couple accepts a stranger's pure mountain water, they learn what it truly means to carry something home from Inunnaki, because some thirsts were never meant to be quenched. They weren't supposed to hike that far. Aya and Ren had only planned a day trip, a quiet escape from Osaka's noise, a chance to breathe before starting their new jobs. The weather was perfect that morning, the sky clean and blue, the air sharp with pine. Mount Inunaki wasn't far, but the locals at the base village had warned them it wasn't a normal mountain. No phone signal, no marked trails, and no residents. The last warning made them laugh. "So, just trees then?" Ren had said, smiling as he adjusted his camera strap. The old shopkeeper who'd given them directions didn't smile back. He just muttered something under his breath, a short prayer, and told them to turn back before sundown. They left anyway. The first few hours were peaceful enough. The path wound through cedar trees and soft moss-covered rocks. Every now and then they passed shrines half swallowed by vines, stone fox statues broken or missing their faces. The forest was quiet, too quiet, Aya thought. Even the wind sounded like it was holding its breath. By noon, they'd reached a small wooden rest area where the path split in 2. One route led to the main overlook, the other, faded and unmarked, disappeared into the deeper forest. Ren wanted to explore it. He'd heard rumors online about an abandoned village hidden somewhere in these woods, cut off after the war. Aya hesitated, but Ren's excitement was infectious. "We'll just look around for a bit," he promised. "Then we'll come back." That was when they saw him, an old man sitting on a rock near the trail's fork, wearing a wide straw hat and simple blue work clothes. In front of him stood a small wooden crate filled with glass bottles, each one capped with a worn cork, and filled with crystal-clear water. A handwritten sign leaned against the crate. "Pure mountain water, take 2 for the climb." Ren grinned. Perfect timing. The man didn't speak at first. His face was deeply lined, skin pale like paper, stretched too thin. When Ren reached for his wallet, the old man raised one trembling hand and shook his head. "No money," he said in a rough, rasping voice. "Take, drink, for the climb." Aya smiled politely and bowed, but something about the man's eyes unsettled her, a glassy, milky color that reflected no light. She whispered to Ren that maybe they shouldn't, but he was already twisting one bottle open. The water was colder than it should have been, almost icy. He drank deeply, wiping his mouth with a satisfied sigh. "Best I've ever had," he said, handing one to her. Aya hesitated, but the old man gave her a small nod, expression unreadable. "You must both drink," he said softly. "The mountain accepts only pears." The words sent a faint chill down her spine, but she didn't want to be rude, so she lifted the bottle and took a sip. The water tasted strange, clean, yes, but with a faint metallic aftertaste she couldn't place. When she looked up, the old man was gone, just gone. No sound, no footsteps, not even the crunch of leaves. The spot where he'd sat was empty, the wooden crate gone too. Ren laughed nervously. "Guess he moves fast." But Aya couldn't shake the unease curling in her stomach. "Maybe we should go back," she said quietly. Ren rolled his eyes. "We're fine, it's just water." They walked on. By the time they reached the ridge, the sky had turned pale gray. A low mist clung to the trees, and the forest seemed to hum with a faint vibration like a deep, slow breath. The air was thick, heavy, and damp. Aya's throat felt dry no matter how much she drank, and Ren kept rubbing at his neck as though something itched beneath his skin. When they stopped to set up their tent near a stream, Aya noticed something strange in the fading light, faint red stains on the rocks near the water. She bent down, touching one carefully. It wasn't paint. It was iron-rich. Rust or something else. "Ren," she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't water from a spring." He looked up, confused. "Then where—" A sudden cough cut him off. He bent over, gagging, the sound wet and deep. Aya rushed to his side, her pulse spiking. When he looked up again, his lips were stained dark red. "It tastes like blood," he whispered. Ren wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, laughing it off at first. "Guess I drank too fast," he said, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. But the color had drained from his face, and Aya could see a faint tremor in his hands. The metallic smell of the water lingered between them, sharp and wrong, like rusting metal left in the rain. "Let's go back," Aya said firmly. "I don't care how close we are to the top. Something's not right." Ren hesitated, glancing toward the trees. "We can't be far. Maybe there's a shrine or a cabin ahead. I just need to rest for a bit." The mist was thickening now, curling low around the forest floor, swallowing the sound of the stream behind them. Aya helped him sit near a fallen log and opened one of the bottles again, half expecting to see the water murky. But it looked clear, too clear, unnaturally still inside the glass. She tilted it slightly, and the light caught something faint inside. Movement. For a second, she thought she saw something swirl within the bottle, a thread, or maybe a hair, floating against the current that shouldn't exist. She blinked. It was gone. "Maybe it's the altitude," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're just dizzy." Ren nodded weakly, but didn't answer. He was staring at the tree line now, unfocused, his lips parted slightly like he was listening for something. "What is it?" Aya whispered. He shook his head. I thought I heard someone whispering. She strained her ears. Nothing. Just the wind weaving through the branches. Still, the silence felt wrong. The forest around them didn't sound alive anymore. No insects, no birds, not even the crack of wood. Only the faint trickle of the stream and something else beneath it. A rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. Aya turned. The sound was coming from their tent. Water was leaking from the seams, dripping steadily onto the tarp floor even though the sky was clear. She crawled closer, unzipping the flap. Inside, the air was freezing cold. Their sleeping bags were damp, their clothes clinging to the fabric like they'd been soaked in fog. She touched the material, and her fingertips came away wet. The smell that rose was faintly earthy, metallic, and sweet. Her throat tightened. Ren, the water. He was staring at her now, his pupils dilated. It's fine, he said, softly. It's the mountain. What? She said it would help. Aya froze. She? He blinked, confused, as though waking from a trance. No, I thought... He rubbed his temples. Never mind. My head hurts. Aya stepped outside again to get air, clutching her jacket tight. The mist had crept closer, swallowing the trail they came from. The trees all looked the same now, twisting silhouettes in the fog. She called out, Hello? Is anyone out there? But the sound didn't travel. It felt swallowed, muffled before it could echo. When she turned back toward Ren, he was drinking again. The same bottle. The one she'd seen movement in. Ren, stop! She shouted, snatching it from his hand. The liquid sloshed out and splashed onto her wrist. It burned. Just for an instant, a cold burn, like frostbite. She dropped the bottle, gasping. The spilled water pooled against the soil and began to sink into the ground unnaturally fast, disappearing within seconds. Ren stared at her hand. Aya. The skin, where the water had touched, was pale, faintly veined with gray. Panic rose in her chest. We're leaving. Now. She grabbed her pack, her flashlight, anything that wasn't soaked. But when she turned back toward the path, she realized she couldn't see the markers anymore. The mist had swallowed everything. Ren tried to stand, but stumbled forward, coughing. This time, the sound was different, thick, choking. When he lifted his head, his lips were trembling. A thin stream of dark water leaked from the corner of his mouth, trickling down his chin. Aya screamed. He wiped at it frantically, his breathing shallow. I can't! It's in my throat! She grabbed him, her hands shaking. We're going down the mountain right now, okay? Just hold on to me. But his body was trembling violently now, the color leaving his skin. His shirt stuck to him, soaked through with something cold and wet. She caught a whiff of it, not sweat, not blood, but that same sickly scent of stagnant water. Then, from deep in the woods, came a voice, old, soft, familiar. Did you drink it? Aya turned toward the sound. Through the mist, she saw a shape, a figure standing where the trail should have been. The old man, his straw hat tilted low, his clothes dry despite the fog. Ren gasped, his eyes wide. He's here. The man raised a hand, palm open. Something glistened in his grip. Another bottle, perfectly clear, condensation beading along the glass like sweat. 2 bottles, he said quietly, for the climb. Aya felt her throat close. What did you give us? The old man tilted his head, his face hidden by shadow. The mountain's gift. You drank her memory. Now she drinks yours. Ren's body jerked violently. He fell to his knees, clutching his stomach, retching. When he opened his mouth, what came out wasn't water. It was black, thick, and crawling. Tiny, writhing shapes, glistening in the pale light. Aya's scream echoed through the fog, but this time something screamed back. Aya didn't know which sound hit her harder, Ren choking beside her, or that voice echoing through the fog, layered and distant, like it was coming from the mountain itself. She pulled Ren back, shaking him, but his body felt heavy, sluggish, like something was dragging him down from the inside. The black water pooled beneath him, thick and reeking of iron and decay. Aya gagged as the stench hit her. The worms that writhed in it were dissolving now, breaking apart into thin, smoke-like wisps that floated upward and vanished into the air. The old man didn't move. He stood a few meters away, half hidden in the mist, that same bottle in his hand. "What did you do to him?" Aya cried, voice cracking. "What is this?" The man tilted his head. His lips moved, but the words that came out weren't in Japanese or any language she recognized. It sounded like humming, deep, rhythmic, ancient. The air around him shimmered faintly, like heat rising from pavement, though the cold was biting enough to sting her skin. Ren suddenly stopped coughing. Aya turned to him in panic, but when she touched his shoulder, his skin was ice cold. His eyes were open, too open. His pupils had clouded over, the same pale, milky color as the old man's. Then he smiled. "Ren?" Aya whispered. He blinked slowly, water dripping from his mouth. "It's okay," he said, voice quiet and distant. "She's calling us." "Who?" He pointed toward the forest behind the old man. Aya followed his gaze. Through the mist, faint shapes began to move, silhouettes shifting between the trees. People, maybe. Or what was left of them. She could see outlines of heads, shoulders, arms, but their proportions were wrong, stretched, their movements jerky, like puppets half-controlled. As they stepped closer, the air grew heavier. Each figure carried something in their hands, bottles, hundreds of them, all filled with that same crystal-clear liquid. Aya stumbled backward, pulling Ren with her. "We're leaving," she said, forcing the words out through trembling lips. Now, Ren didn't resist. He followed her numbly, his expression serene, his eyes blank. They moved through the fog, but the forest didn't feel like it was letting them go. The path curved in on itself, trees repeating in the same pattern, a knot of branches she swore she'd seen minutes before. Every direction looked the same. Then, just ahead, a light appeared, warm and golden, a small cabin. Aya almost sobbed in relief. "There! Someone's there!" She half-dragged, half-led Ren toward it. The door creaked open before she even touched it. Inside, a single lantern burned on a wooden table. A woman sat beside it, middle-aged, wearing hiking gear that looked decades old. Her hair was gray, her face tired but kind. When she saw them, she stood immediately. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Aya nodded frantically. "Please, my boyfriend. He's sick. We drank something." The woman's eyes flicked to the bottles still strapped to Aya's pack. Her face went pale. "You drank the water?" Aya froze. "Yes, but—" The woman grabbed her wrist, grip firm despite her age. "You need to leave. Right now. Go back down the way you came, and don't look behind you." "What about him?" The woman looked at Ren, really looked, and her expression darkened. "He's already halfway taken." Aya's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" The woman hesitated. "That water isn't from any spring. It's from the old plague. Well, the one they sealed during the fevers. They drowned the infected there, to keep the sickness from spreading. The mountain still remembers. It doesn't like to let go of what it claims." Aya's hands began to shake. He said she's calling us. Who's she? The woman lowered her eyes. The mountain spirit, or what's left of her. The villagers said she pitied the dying, offered them mercy. But mercy turned to hunger. Behind them, the floorboards creaked. Aya turned. Ren was standing again, facing the open door. His body was swaying gently, as though caught in a current only he could feel. Ren, don't... He stepped outside. The fog swallowed him instantly. Aya screamed, darting after him, but the woman grabbed her arm. If you follow him, you won't come back, she warned. He's already part of it. Tears blurred Aya's vision. I can't leave him. The woman's grip tightened. Then you'll both stay. Forever. A crash cut through their shouting glass, shattering. Aya looked down and saw that one of the bottles on her pack had cracked. The water inside spilled across the floor, but instead of soaking into the wood, it spread outward, darkening like ink. Something moved beneath the surface, slow, serpentine. The woman backed away. Don't touch it. Aya's body locked up as a faint whisper rose from the spreading puddle. Ren's voice. Aya, drink. The lantern flickered violently, the room plunging in and out of shadow. When the light steadied again, the floor was dry, and Ren's voice was now coming from just outside the door. Come back. I'm thirsty. Aya froze, every muscle in her body trembling. Ren's voice drifted in through the open door, soft, weak, but steady. Come back, he said again. You left me. The fog outside pulsed faintly, breathing in slow waves that made the shadows shift and curl like smoke. She could just make out his outline standing a few feet beyond the porch, perfectly still. The woman grabbed her wrist, whispering sharply, Don't answer. It isn't him anymore. But Aya couldn't look away. It sounds like him. The woman's eyes were wide, filled with fear. That's what it wants. It uses their voice, their face. Once you step into the fog, you'll follow it down to the water. Aya swallowed hard, her throat burning with the dryness that had been growing since she'd drunk the mountain water. Each breath she took scraped against her lungs like sand. What do you mean down to the water? The woman hesitated, her voice breaking slightly. The well, the one they sealed, that's where it ends. That's where it keeps them. Another whisper from outside, closer now. Aya, please. She turned toward the door, and this time she saw him more clearly. Ren's figure swayed slightly in the mist. The fog clung to his skin like it was alive, weaving around his arms, his neck. His eyes glowed faintly pale, reflecting the lantern light behind her. Aya, he said, voice trembling. It hurts. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. The woman hissed her name, but Aya shook free. I just want to see him, if I can reach him. You can't reach what's already been swallowed, the woman warned. Aya ignored her. She stepped outside, and the cold hit her instantly, thick, wet, suffocating. Her breath came out in short white clouds. Ren was only a few steps ahead, but the fog between them shimmered, distorting his shape. Ren, she whispered, tears mixing with the mist. Come back inside, please. He smiled faintly. I found it. Found what? The source. His hand lifted, pointing toward the forest behind him. Aya followed the motion with her eyes and froze. The trees ahead were gone. In their place, the ground dipped into a massive crater filled with still black water. The surface didn't reflect the lantern light. It swallowed it. Bubbles rose slowly to the surface, bursting with a faint hiss. Ren took a step closer to it. Aya ran forward, grabbing his arm. His skin was colder than ice. Ren, stop! He turned to her slowly, his face half hidden by the mist. When she saw his eyes, her breath caught. They weren't eyes anymore. They were hollow, water-filled sockets. Inside them, something faint moved, twisting. "I'm so thirsty," he said softly. And then he smiled, a slow, unnatural stretch of lips that cracked his cheeks open slightly. Black water spilled from the corners of his mouth. Aya screamed, stumbling backward. But when she looked down, her own reflection shimmered in a puddle by her feet, and it wasn't hers. It was Ren's face, staring back, smiling up at her. The woman appeared in the doorway, shouting something she couldn't hear. The sound around Aya had changed, muffled, as if she were underwater. The mist thickened, wrapping around her like a living thing. She turned and saw Ren walking straight into the black pool, his body sinking soundlessly. "Ren?" She ran after him, plunging knee-deep into the freezing water. But it wasn't water. It felt thick, viscous, clinging to her skin like oil. The smell of rot and rust filled her lungs. She tried to pull back, but the ground beneath her feet shifted like mud. Hands, dozens of pale, wet hands reached up from below, grabbing at her legs, her waist, her arms. They weren't pulling her down violently. They were guiding her. Ren's voice came again, softer now, echoing from somewhere beneath the surface. "Don't fight it. It's peaceful down here." The woman on the porch shouted something, a chant maybe. Her voice cracked and rose, growing louder as she held up a talisman that flickered with faint golden light. Aya felt the grip on her legs loosen slightly. The fog began to recede, curling away from the cabin like smoke drawn backward by wind. But Ren was gone. The black surface rippled once, then stilled. The woman rushed forward and grabbed Aya by the arms, pulling her free of the mud. "It doesn't want you yet," she said breathlessly. "It only takes one." Aya collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, her body trembling. "I can still save him," she sobbed. "He's not gone. He's not—" The woman looked at her sadly. "He is, but part of him will stay with you now. That's the price." Aya's eyes darted to the bottles still hanging from her pack. The glass clinked softly as she moved. One of them had filled itself again, the same clear water, condensation dripping down the sides. Her stomach turned. "What happens if I drink it again?" The woman hesitated. "Then you won't be thirsty anymore." Aya's breath caught. "You mean—" The woman just looked at her. "The mountain never wastes what it takes." Aya stared down at the bottle, her hands shaking. Inside the glass, something tiny moved, a pale thread twisting lazily, like a living thing suspended in water. Behind her, the well gurgled softly, as if exhaling. And then, just before the fog swallowed it again, she heard it, a faint whisper, carried on the cold wind. 2 bottles, for the climb. The fog didn't clear that night. It never really does on Mount Inunaki. Aya sat inside the cabin, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin, the lantern between her and the old woman flickering in and out of light. Outside, the black water still rippled faintly, the surface moving as though something below was breathing. Every few minutes, Aya swore she could hear Ren's voice muffled, distorted, whispering her name from beneath the earth. She wanted to run back into the mist, but the woman had bolted the door shut. "You can't help him anymore," she said, her voice shaking but steady enough to sound practiced. "Once the water has your name, it keeps it." Aya turned toward her, eyes red, furious. "What are you talking about? What do you mean, my name?" The woman stared at her for a long moment before answering. "That water, it remembers the living. It takes the memory of your breath, your heartbeat, your voice, and when you drink it, it keeps a piece of you. That's how it calls you back." Aya swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" The woman's expression darkened. "You finish what you started. You carry the mountain home." Aya blinked, her throat tight. "Carry it home?" The woman nodded toward her pack. The bottle inside was glowing faintly, pale blue light shimmering within the glass, illuminating the condensation running down its sides. "It gave you a vessel," the woman said softly. "That's how it spreads." Aya's stomach dropped. "You mean the water?" The woman nodded. "People think the mountain is cursed, but it's not. It's hungry. The water carries its will. Every time someone drinks, it remembers another face, another voice. That's why it's always clear, it's always new, but it's never empty." Aya felt the weight of the bottle pressing against her back like a heartbeat. "So what happens if I take it with me?" The woman looked her dead in the eye. "Then the mountain follows you, every drop you spill, every glass you pour, it'll grow roots wherever it lands." Aya's chest tightened as the full meaning sank in. Carry the mountain home. She understood now. Every missing hiker, every strange disappearance, they hadn't been lost. They'd been taken, chosen as carriers. "Why tell me this?" Aya whispered. "Why not just let me leave?" The woman's eyes flicked toward the window. "Because you still can. For now." "What about you?" The woman smiled faintly. It wasn't kind. "I already carried mine home a long time ago." Aya followed her gaze to the corner of the cabin. There, half buried beneath a layer of dirt and moss, sat another bottle, the same design, the same glass. Inside, faint shapes moved, not threads, not worms, but something smaller. Fingers, dozens of them. Aya's breath hitched. "I was with a group," the woman interrupted. "We all drank. I made it out, but they didn't." The water didn't forget. A low rumble shook the cabin. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams. The woman stood suddenly, grabbing Aya's arm. "Listen to me. You have until sunrise. If you're still here when the light touches the trees, you'll never find your way out again. The mountain closes itself in daylight. It hides what it keeps." Aya didn't move. She stared at the bottle glowing inside her pack. "Ren's still down there." The woman didn't answer at first. Her face softened, almost pitying. "Then pray he stays there, because if you bring him back, he won't come alone." Aya couldn't breathe. The realization struck her all at once, the dreams she'd been having, the whispers that hadn't stopped since she drank the water. Ren wasn't calling for help. He was calling her down. The sound came again, faint, gurgling from outside. "Aya, I'm cold." She covered her ears. "Stop it! Stop saying my name!" The woman grabbed her by the shoulders. "Don't listen. It's not him. Anymore." The walls of the cabin began to darken, streaks of damp spreading outward from the floorboards. The smell of iron filled the air again. Aya looked down and saw water seeping through the cracks in the wood. Black, thick, rising inch by inch. The woman's eyes went wide. "It's waking up. You need to go. Now." Aya hesitated for only a second before she slung her pack over her shoulder and ran for the door. Outside, the fog was moving differently now, spiraling, almost like it was chasing her. The trees leaned inward as she passed, their trunks slick and dripping. Every step splashed through shallow puddles that hadn't been there before. The path twisted again, looping back on itself. But this time she noticed something new. There were footprints beside hers, Ren's. They were wet, perfectly shaped, and fresh. Aya broke into a sprint, following the faint slope downhill, hoping it led somewhere anywhere out. But the forest didn't let her go easily. The whispering returned, surrounding her from all directions. Not one voice now, but dozens, maybe hundreds. She stumbled to a stop at a fork in the trail. 2 paths, no markers. Her chest heaved. She didn't know which way to go. Then she heard the sound of running water. Ahead, to the left. It felt like hope, but deep down she knew it wasn't. Still, she moved toward it, because what else could she do? When she reached the stream, she fell to her knees, scooping the cold water into her hands. For a second, it looked clean, clear, real. Then, as it ran through her fingers, she saw her reflection smiling back up at her. Not her face anymore. Wren's. Behind her, the fog shifted again, whispering softly in 100 voices that were almost her own. You drank it. You carry it. You belong to the mountain now. By morning, the mist around Mount Inunaki had thinned, revealing nothing but quiet forest and empty trails. The locals said the storm must have passed overnight, washing the paths clean. But when the first search team arrived, they found something strange. Near the old rest stop, a collapsed tent, a single backpack, and 2 glass bottles placed neatly side by side. Both were filled to the brim with perfectly clear water. There was no sign of Aya or Ren, no footprints, no signs of struggle, just the faint smell of rust and pine, hanging heavier than the morning fog. The authorities wrote it off as another hiking accident. Everyone did. Everyone except the old shopkeeper in the village below. He'd seen the bottles before. He told the police not to touch them, muttering a single phrase they didn't understand. The mountain collects what's owed. Later that night, 2 hikers passing through claimed they saw a figure sitting on a rock near the trailhead, an old man wearing a straw hat, smiling quietly beside a small wooden crate. They thought he was selling souvenirs. His sign read, "Pure mountain water, take 2 for the climb." When they looked closer, they swore one of the bottles was already open, condensation dripping down the sides like sweat. The man nodded, his voice soft and calm. "Don't worry," he said. "There's plenty for everyone." The next morning, the crate was gone, but new bottles appeared in its place, lined neatly outside the old shrine at the base of the mountain. All of them perfectly sealed, all of them glistening in the sunlight. And if you lean in close enough, locals say you can see faces reflected faintly in the glass. Eyes wide, lips moving beneath the surface, whispering through the water, waiting for the next thirsty traveler to take them home. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Tomorrow we will be uploading another terrifying story. Feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications to never miss another scary video. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.